Hey everyone. Before we get to today's episode of Perpetual Chess, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who has supported the show. Ways to support Perpetual Chess include telling a friend about the show, subscribing on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you use. Better yet, leaving a positive review on that platform. But most of all, I want to thank the people who've supported me with the new Patreon page. If you haven't heard, it's patreon.com/perpetualchess, and the suggested donation there is $2 a month. So I tried to keep it as affordable as possible for as many people as possible. The donations go to cover things like the production, the audio equipment, and the hosting for the show. So if you can't afford it, you definitely shouldn't donate, but if you can, it's really appreciated and it helps out a lot. And guess what? I think it's also going to make the show better. What we're going to do is people who donate to the show will get advance notice of the guests, and they will have the chance to send in questions to the guests. So if you feel like there's some topic I don't cover enough, or if you have some favorite player that you're waiting for them to come on, well, there's a good chance we're going to get them at some point. So now you can sit back and wait, and then when someone's coming on who interests you, you can pounce like a cheetah and get your questions in. I think this is going to make it a better show overall, more community driven. I've always said I want this show to be by the people and for the people. Well, I think that this will help make that happen. So thanks again for all the support and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. On Perpetual Chess, I have weekly conversations with the chess world's best players, promoters, and educators about their lives, careers, current projects, and best practices. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Perpetual Chess Podcast. I am joined this week by Grandmaster, author, and PhD Jesse Kraai. Jesse, do you prefer Grandmaster or Doctor when we address you?
I just like my wife to call me Grandmaster, otherwise it doesn't matter.
Nice. Okay, so we'll just go with Jesse then. So Jesse, I know that you just got back from a chess tournament. When I have guests who are actually out there playing chess, which is not all that often, I like to get the trip report first and foremost. So how did the Washington Chess Congress treat you?
Oh, I was hoping you weren't going to go there. I just got back this morning, and I had a terrible tournament. It could have gone the other way, just a couple key moments, and I had a couple bad pairings. But yeah, it's a very tough tournament for me. I haven't been playing that much, and I was inspired to go because a student of mine was like, yeah, let's go play a tournament together. And, now I have a kid, and so just escaping for the weekend is kind of an interesting thing to arrange. So I took it on probably without having done the necessary prep, too. Anyways, long story short, it was a terrible tournament.
I can relate to all of that. I mean, my terrible chess is worse than your terrible chess, but I can definitely relate to having a kid and wanting to escape, and then it's one thing to carve out the time to play, but it's a whole different ball of wax to actually be prepared for it.
Right. That's right.
So you mentioned some bad pairings. What was the trouble with the pairings?
So it was a weird tournament. It was like they had about 7 strong players, 2,500 plus, and then a big gap between that. So there was hardly no 2,400s really, maybe 2 2,300s, and then loads of 2,200s. So whether you got paired into the elite group or not, it was like a big difference. And some of us got lucky, and some of us didn't. And to win a tournament like that, that's what you need. You need some lucky breaks, and you need a couple good pairings. And I got neither of those things.
Yeah, that makes it tough. So, how was the quality of the games from your perspective?
That's a good question to ask me right after the tournament, I guess. I felt I played too slow. I come from a generation which just had slower time controls, and this was like 40 moves in 100 minutes, and really just like a 10-second delay, and then you get another 30 minutes, and I was in time pressure a lot, So I have to, if I was going to get serious, I'd have to improve that, and I think part of it was I just wasn't seeing stuff fast enough. So, if I was going to get faster on the clock, I'd have to be faster, with my calculation and stuff like that.
Okay, so how would you work on that if you were to work on it?
I would have to start studying more again. I mean, I really think, we'll probably end up talking about studying and stuff, but taking time to go over my own games is the biggest thing.
Okay.
And with that, I kind of get inside my own head and figure out what the decision-making process is, in a lot of these situations.
Okay, and would there be like calculation exercises too, or more just focused on? I know and again, like you said, we'll get to this, but you've written about sort of your general recommendation to just sort of go over one's games in sort of agonizing detail.
Right. I think that's the hardest thing and the most important thing to do. And I guess my general philosophy in terms of improvement is evolved now to the point where I think you have to do that with all the games you play. But then in terms of other stuff, I think you should do what you enjoy. Like some people actually enjoy openings. Like I don't think you should go study openings. But if you enjoy that, fine. Go study some openings. If you enjoy tactics online or in a book, fine. A lot of people like puzzles. Like I like the puzzles. So, way better than a crossword puzzle is the chess puzzle.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So that's just something that I enjoy. But I think, as long as you go over your games in really good detail and then you just do whatever on this. Some people like playing Blitz. I play Blitz too much, but even that, as long as you just do what you enjoy when you're not going over your games. I think that's what I would have to do, and I'd have to do it several hours a day,
Yeah, I agree, and we've had a couple guests who've given the same advice, and I think it's practical, especially for the people who are not looking to be world-class chess players. There comes a point where, you're playing chess for enjoyment, so why not do the things you enjoy? But regarding Blitz, I do wonder, like, I enjoy playing Blitz, but my pattern is if I ever play online, I enjoy the game, but I don't want to look at it when I'm done, and then I don't get any better. Which is not as enjoyable. So that part for me becomes a sort of vicious cycle, although the game itself can be fun to play.
I agree. Blitz is like, for me, it can really become a bad habit where I just do it to relax, and I sit here with my computer. I don't even have a mouse, and I just use the finger pad, so of course I'm like a couple seconds too slow or something. And I just do it to relax and enjoy myself, and it's kind of an escape. But yeah, I'm not really getting better there.
Right. Well, you're also, you've got the highest title at least. So, you're at a level where like getting better, I would think requires even more. Like, it requires like a sort of full-time push that probably isn't that practical.
Right. I think, honestly, I think for a lot of people who reach GM like me, it's hard to imagine what your next goal would be. Like I do enjoy playing, but it was great the process of becoming GM. That's way better than actually being a GM. Huh. Once you're a GM, you don't really have any clear goal to strive for. Like you can tell yourself, like, I want to be X rating, but that doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah. There's no proximate goal. People tend to just go to the next round number and the rating thing, but that doesn't have the same import as being a GM. That's just such a huge achievement that, like, getting to 2,600 or even like doesn't match it in terms of like, impressing someone at a cocktail party or something.
Or just as personal goal. I feel like I have students at a variety of levels, and for them to make expert even can be a huge lifelong dream that requires a lot of work. And that's also a beautiful thing. And it's kind of like a title, and you reach it, and that's great, It's so rare in life that you can actually like have a line that you need to or want to cross, and you can work for it, and you can actually get there.
That is true. Definitely true in my life. So Jesse, for those who don't know, I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with you. You're a well-known grandmaster, been around a long time. But why don't you tell them a little bit more about your background, where you grew up, where you're living now, stuff like that?
Okay, well, in terms of, I guess I'll start with I'll tell the story as a chess biography. I started late. I was like 12, and I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which did have a little bit of chess, but obviously was a huge disadvantage compared to like the big cities like the Bay Area or New York City, where they're just having tournaments all the time, you know, and I had just like, I could play a couple tournaments a year, or then I'd have to travel out of it. And so as a kid, I really didn't make that much progress, and I didn't have a coach. So in terms of chess, you know, what happened, I think this happens with a lot of people too. You know, you do your years of studying as a kid, but you're confused as a kid anyway. And then you go off to college and do some stuff. And I did that for, 10 years. I went and got my PhD in philosophy and stuff. And then it was much later that I came back, and I had been in Germany, and I had gotten my IM title there in Germany. And I guess I got turned on to some chess culture in Germany too, just like playing in the Bundesliga. But I wasn't like training or anything over there. I was just playing, enjoying myself. But then I got back, I just got into my head that would be a cool goal, and I thought I could do it in like a couple years. And it ended up taking me 7 years to get the GM title as an old man.
Well, I think a lot of us, you could give us 7 years and we still wouldn't get it. So I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. But okay, so just to nail down the timeline a little bit. So when you finished, say, university, what was your rating when you were like 22?
I was about 2350 or something.
Okay, so you still managed to become, you know, quite strong despite the limitations of growing up in New Mexico.
I guess, you know, I mean, you know, I played in like the under 21 championships. I was never really close to winning any of those, and it was it was an interesting time. But at 2350, you're not getting invited to many cool events, you know?
Right.
Like you're not getting to play in the cool tournaments.
Right. Well, how did you get to that level though? I mean, you know, you grew up prior to the computer age, so the world was not flat. You were at a big disadvantage in terms of like having access to training and access to tournaments. So how did you even reach that level in your in your teen years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have very fond memories of studying chess late at night, like everyone else is asleep, and I hated high school. High school was like, high school people weren't actually interested in the stuff they were saying. They were all just trying to give you a line like, oh, you got to do this so you can get a job or something. The terrible high school. And so I found a lot of solace in studying chess, and I remember reading late at night too, just all kinds of stuff. And back then there was like these informators, that had all the games in them. And there were some chess books out there, not great chess books. There were some books, some game collections, and opening books. And I had a couple chances to study, like one time I did a camp with Mednis in New York City. That was like a week-long thing. Yeah. That was about it, honestly. I had very few chances to go study with anybody. So I had to like make it up all on my own, like how to think about the game. Of course I read books, but most books aren't very good at explaining to you how to think about positions and stuff. So I feel like my positional understanding was very stunted at that stage. Like my tactics were maybe reasonable, but I had no positional understanding at all. Nothing.
Huh. So you think it's funny because back then, I mean, this would have been, 30 years ago or so, right? So back then, I feel like books were as much positional and game-oriented. Like the most common chess book, once you got past sort of the beginner level, I think was like the, Zurich 1953 and my 60 most memorable games and books like that I wouldn't think necessarily inhibit your positional growth relative to your tactical.
Mm-hmm. All I can say from personal experience is like I read those books and I read a lot more when I came back to chess. But I think like in terms of understanding stuff, it was like hanging out with Russian players in Germany, Eastern Bloc country players, in Germany and then later in the United States, where I feel like they had a language, like they had a vocabulary of the game and how to talk about it that was kind of funny, and it was kind of like in your face, and it wasn't like book language, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays there's a little bit of that comes through when you watch like commentary. You know, you watch some people doing commentary, you get a little bit of that kind of fun way of talking about chess.
Can you think of an example?
I think an example everyone knows. I think Yasser talks about the game in like the smooth style.
Right.
He's got this nice smooth field style that people like. I think a lot of people got into the videos that I did when I was at Chess Lecture and stuff. Just stuff where you try to explain the position at the most simplest level. You know, even and I when I say that, I don't mean like talking down to people. I really think that when anybody looks at a position, it's very helpful to like just say out loud the most simple things that are going on in the position.
Okay, so once you noticed this shortcoming vis-a-vis players who came up in different cultures, like what did you do to address it in your own game?
I think it was really going over my own games all the time, and I had notebooks, and I would write about every move. I would like physically write out on the page what I thought was going on, and criticize my own moves and my opponent's moves. And yes, I would write out variations and stuff, but I would really also try to write out what was happening. And I think that gave me like not only the vocabulary of the game, but like a way of talking, an approach that would help me, like build up an understanding of the game. Okay.
And I know you've written general advice on how to improve. You had a blog that is not as active anymore, much to my and I'm sure other people's dismay. But you give 7 improvement tips, and one of them, a few of them basically touch on that. So study your games with a notebook and pen, no computer, get a nice wooden set, write everything down, the variations, what you missed, your evaluations, your prejudice, your principles of play. Do tactical puzzles, study with friends, learn the game from their perspective, go over classical games, teach others, and get fit, the worst one of all.
Yeah.
So has anything changed from those principles that you wrote about 4 years ago?
The only thing I have to say about it, looking back 4 years ago, is I am I feel a little bit like a charlatan because I have not been, I haven't had the energy to follow through with it. My own rules.
Right.
So now I'm having these terrible tournaments. But in terms of improvement, yes, I still believe strongly that's what you need to do. Well, those who can't do teach, right? That's right.
Yeah, it's much easier to give the advice than to actually do it. So, but you've got good perspective. So you're a professional chess teacher now?
I don't know if I'd call myself professional. I do about 8 to 10 hours of chess stuff. Like I do some lessons, and then I'm doing some commentary at chess.com. But it's not like a full time. I'm not doing 34 hours a week. Not at all.
Okay. Do you have anything else you do like work wise? I know you're a parent, so that can keep you pretty busy too.
So I wrote the chess novel. That came out in 2013, and then I've been trying to write a book that's mostly non-chess, and I've got this draft of it now, and I feel pretty good about it, but I honestly don't know where it's gonna go. I put it down the last couple of weeks to just get other stuff done, and now actually, like today, I have to rethink about like how I'm gonna go forward with that. But anyways, short answer, I'm also trying to write a second book.
Oh, interesting. So no chess content in this book?
There's a couple chess illusions, but it's not chess-based at all.
Okay. Is it philosophy-based or?
No, it's the story of this rich guy who gets his woman stolen by this fit homeless guy in the Bay Area.
Nice.
Yeah.
So fiction?
Fiction, yeah.
It could be reality too, but sounds more likely to be fiction, unfortunately. Cool. So, and And you studied, the reason I mentioned philosophy is for those who don't know, you studied philosophy. So a couple questions. Why philosophy and why did you go to Germany for it?
Like a lot of life stuff, it all happened a little bit by chance. Let's see. So I got, in high school, I really was a terrible student. I had no desire to do what they were telling me to do. And one of my life regrets, in fact, is not just dropping out of high school.
That's funny.
But I got a chess scholarship to this little and beautiful liberal arts college called Scheimer College. And, I feel like if I hadn't gotten that scholarship, I would have tried to become, a chess professional. So there's kind of like a divergent paths thing going on right then in life. And mostly, I think, probably social pressure, parents and everybody just like, oh, yeah, you got to go to college. It's what's expected. It's expected of you. So I did that. And, yeah, it was great. It was a good experience. And I got into it. And then Germany happened because, actually two things. First, when I was a kid, I was reading a lot of Nietzsche and stuff, and I had, a German philosophy interest, and I always, I had this prejudice about, trying to read stuff in the original language, and my German was terrible. I had this terrible German teacher in high school, and I had no desire then, and so I knew, 4 words. And I got to college, and there was this teacher who seemed really cool, and she was going to do this German class, and I was like, okay, I'll try this German class. And so that happened, and then how did this all happen? So then I was doing that, and then my senior year I had a German girlfriend, and we started speaking German all the time. And then she, at the end of that, I didn't know what was going to go on after I finished undergrad, and she was like, oh, yeah, just go to Germany. You can go there for free and whatever. I was like, that sounds like a good adventure.
Uh-huh.
So that's how that all started. And I didn't think I was going to stay there that long. I'd get a master's or something. And no, I stayed and I did a PhD. And yeah.
So how long were you there?
I was in Germany for 5 years.
Okay. And you were in Heidelberg, is that right?
That's where I did my PhD, but I was also in Jena, which is in East Germany, and then Bielefeld, which is in northern Germany.
Okay, shout out to Germany. Unfortunately, I don't know any of those towns. Could you describe them a bit? What was life like there?
Jena was the coolest. I think of all the places in my life that I've lived, it was the most interesting. So I got there in '94. The wall had come down just a little bit earlier, and the East Germans were already kind of on edge about, the wall had come down, there's a lot of good feeling, and the East Germans were, by '94, were already on edge about the West Germans. They felt like they had been a little bit betrayed by them, whether rightly or wrongly.
Right.
And then as an American, though, I came, and they were genuinely, interested in, who I was. And given that I'm kind of an introvert, I don't like talking to people that much, I ended up having all these great conversations. And what was very interesting to me about my time there and those conversations were that so many people were legitimately questioning what was going on. And what I mean by that is I feel like here in the States and in Western Europe, people think they understand the world. They have a view of the world, and it's very stable. It hasn't changed much in their lifetimes, and they kind of think they know things, right? But these people in East Germany, they had just gotten smacked.
Right.
They had just gotten totally smacked. Everything that they had been taught had just been wiped off, and they were just standing in this new place, and they were trying to figure it out, and they had honest questions about it. And to me, that was more than any philosophy book, that was interesting because it showed the tenuousness of the things that we think are so real in our life. We think we understand and then we don't. I think a similar experience that people seek out is, when you do LSD or something, people are trying to find an alternate reality, not so much because they want the reality to like live in the alternate reality, but they want to experience the fact that the reality that they think they live in is not as real as they think it is. You know.
So living in East Germany in 1994 was like doing LSD.
It was like it in the just in that experience of getting to see that these worldviews that we have are not as fixed and constant as, you know, most of us think, especially in the West, you know, where things have not changed for a long time.
Interesting. And was Jena, is it small town, large town, rural, urban?
Small town, about 100,000 people or something like that.
Okay. And how long were you there?
I was there for about 2 years, and then it was just chance, really. Like I had this prof, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you should go study under this other guy. He's famous, blah blah blah." And I was at that point in Jena, I was very pumped on the German experience, and I didn't really understand that by going to the West Germany that it would really change. Because going to West Germany, you're just, in terms of the structure of the society, it's just like America. Americans and Germans will disagree, but in fact, like, it's a basic capitalist society, and everyone has their fixed viewpoints, and they think they know what's going on, right? So, like, the conversations I was having were less cool. But anyways, yeah, I went to Heidelberg, and then I was there for like a year and a half. And then my prof got a deal at like a new fancy professorship in Bielefeld. So I like followed him there, but I finished the PhD in Heidelberg.
Okay. And then what brought you back to the States?
It's a good question. It was like late '99, and it was a kind of weird thing where my father had died, and I had to finish my dissertation. So I came home, and I was hanging out with my mom a little bit, finishing the dissertation. And then another weird thing, totally random, is that this friend of my sister's from high school, her father needed someone to house sit the place, so I house sat the place, and he was a prof at this school called St. John's in Santa Fe. And then he was like, "Oh, you want to do an interview for the school, right?" And so one thing led to another, and then all of a sudden I was teaching there for a little while.
And that's one of the like reading only schools, right?
Right. So right. Which I wonder about now, because, you know, I grew up reading, and I look at the kids today, and no one's reading it. It's a totally new world. And like people who like read books are often actually doing audiobooks, or like, you know, now we're doing podcasts. Yeah,
well, I feel like it's fringe enough where that model, it might not be bad for business, that it's even more sort of on the extreme than it was perceived. I'm 40 than like when you and I were thinking about college, because even back then it attracted a certain type of student, you know, someone who, like yourself. I mean, I know you taught there and didn't go there, but someone who sort of looks at things from a different angle and doesn't necessarily feel like what they're being told the way to do things is necessarily correct.
Right. I think there's a real challenge for not just, you know, places like St. John's, but all liberal arts colleges, which were all based on reading. And I don't see how those places are going to survive, honestly. It's like, in a lot of ways, it's my spiritual home, you know, that culture of reading and writing. And but it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. And one of the reasons is not only about reading, but when you look at colleges these days, it's not like a bunch of white kids. It's a bunch of like Asian kids who want to study math and science, which is great, but it's not this old model of the liberal arts, which was how all the colleges, both in, you know, the U.S. and in Europe, kind of like, that was the model. You know, that's what you did. You read a bunch of books and you wrote some papers on it, and then you talked about it a little bit, and then you were done. You know?
Right, yeah. So how long did you end up teaching there?
I did that for 2 years.
Okay. Yeah. And then you found your way to the Bay Area, right?
Bay Area was later, and that was a great time. That was actually, we were talking about goals. And so one thing that happened that was kind of cool was I finished the GM title in 2007. And then 2000...
I like how you describe it basically as if it's another PhD. Like you finish the title, check that.
No, it was. I feel like in my life I've only done 3 projects. You know, I did the PhD, I did the GM title, and then I wrote the book.
Okay.
You know, those are the only 3 things I've ever done in my life.
Right.
And they were all pretty hard. But yeah, I finished the thing, and then there was this group of American players with like David Pruess and Josh Friedel and a bunch of other people. And we went to Beijing to play in this thing called the Mind Games tournament. It was totally cool. It was right after the Olympics. And we learned there that the top Chinese players were all living together. And that's something they still do. They have like this house and they're living together. The trainers live there. The best women players, you know, everybody's living there. And so we got back and we were like, dude, let's just get a house and we'll do this, you know? And so we did, and that was great. And it was like David Pruess, Vinay Bhatt, Josh Friedel, Arun Sharma was there. Later, Sam Shanklin came. And so we had this group of people studying that was, it was pretty cool. But in terms of my own life, it was kind of like, well, you know, I had like done the GM title and then it was like, well, now what, you know, am I going to reach like 2590 or 2600? What's the goal? I don't know. But that was kind of the dream, you know, to live in the house that get better.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. It's actually, I think Ben Feingold was the one who mentioned it on this podcast before. I mean, I've also had David Pruess on as a guest, but I feel like we didn't talk about the chess house that much. But anyway, it's definitely, it's fabled in the chess world.
Well, it's definitely something that people should copy. And we are not the only ones to have done it. I think throughout chess history, you know, there's been a couple in New York City and, you know, but a lot of times it's just chess players living together, not necessarily chess players like who have some time to like do the thing, you know.
Right. So did you guys study a fair amount while you were living together?
We did, and we did a couple cool, but I have to say it was hard to organize people's schedule. It was difficult. There was a lot of practical challenges to that. And so it wasn't as regular as maybe I would have liked. But what I definitely got out of it was, you know, when you study with some strong people, you can begin to see how they see the game. And I think one of my big takeaways was I got to study with Josh Friedel a bunch, and he just has a completely different style of play than me, and it's very attacking and sometimes speculative, and we'd be analyzing and he would always want to sacrifice something, and I'd be like, dude, what are you doing? But after a while, you know, I kind of got inside his head, and sometimes, you know, it's very interesting. It's kind of a beautiful thing that I managed to do is like, I'm not by nature an attacking player, and sometimes you'll face opponents who I know that the only way to crack them is to really light up the board, you know, like say Joel Benjamin. That guy's a great player, but if you want a chance, you have to light up the board. So if I face someone like that, I'm like, all right, I'm going to channel the panda, man. I'm going to channel the panda. That was my name for Josh Friedel, you know, channel the panda. And
why was he the panda?
It all happened on that Beijing trip because there were all these pandas everywhere. And then he was always sleeping. The guy was sleeping all the time. It was so hard to get him up. So I don't know. I started calling him the panda.
Okay. Anyway, sorry. Go on with your story. So you channel the panda.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if I had, in an ideal world, I think it would be great for me or any chess player to be able to, like, go into different modus of like a different someone they know and like be able to see the game through their eyes, you know. I think it's possible to do. But I think that was like a really interesting one because other players are kind of closer to me, you know, in terms of how they play the game. And Josh had just a different view of the game. You know, we never suggested the same moves in any given position.
That's funny. And were you working as a chess teacher then, or What was your line of work while living with those guys?
When I met girls at that time, I would just tell them I was downwardly mobile. And I was hoping that line passed, But no, I didn't. I just was scraping by, and we had this house in El Cerrito, which is just outside of Berkeley, and it was the economic crisis, and we had pretty cheap rent. I think I was paying $300 or $400 a month for this kind of big room, so it didn't take much to get by, and I taught just a little bit, very little.
That's insanely cheap for the Bay Area.
That's right, yeah. It's not that way anymore.
Yeah, that's for sure. I lived in Oakland for a bit, but that was also a long time ago. And yeah, it's probably, I think real estate is up like threefold since I left 11 years ago or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're there for a while. You're scraping by. How long were you there?
Let's see. I was 2008, and then the chess house was disbanded in May of 2010. And people like Vinay wanted to go work for the man. And he went off and worked for the man. Is still working for the man. I think he's doing quite well. And I think at that time, too, actually, I should say, for Vinay as well, maybe like me, it was like, this is my chance to try to do it with this house. I'm going to try to improve and see where I can take it. And he did. He worked very hard, and then he went into the real world. And Vinay's a genius. This guy is literally a genius, and he can do things with the mouse on his computer that no one can do. And this is Vinay Bhatt for listeners. And is he's a computer programmer now, or what does he do? I think he's doing market analytics, as I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of chess players are doing stuff in some way mildly related to finance,
Right.
And he's doing that. And then eventually, Josh stayed on for a little while, and then eventually he went to Milwaukee and is doing chess stuff there. He wasn't into he wanted the cold, bitter North. And so he got it. And David Proust started around that time to work for chess.com.
Okay.
He was one of the people who really started that place, and that was taking up all his time then. Yeah,
he told that story on the podcast. So listeners who haven't heard him, you can pick up that thread by listening to my interview with David. But okay, so you were forced to strike out on your own, I guess.
Well, and that was the point too, where I was like, you know what, I'll just I'm going to try to write this book, and then because I was kind of like a weird thing that I'm sure many of your listeners have had. You get to a certain point in your life, and you're just like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? I've never really been interested in working. It doesn't seem like I don't know what that's supposed to do for me. As long as I have enough money to get by, I want to have I need some kind of dream, some kind of goal. And so, 2010, I got the dream started of working on the chess novel. And then I did that for, I don't know, 3 years.
That's insane. So where'd you live when you did that?
I was living in Berkeley.
Okay, just got your own place and hunkered down.
Oh no, I had to live cheap, man. I was in my own place. I had to live real cheap, and I lived in this kind of hippie commune, and it wasn't really a hippie commune, but it was like.
It's Berkeley. Everything's a hippie commune. Really.
we were living together. A lot of people coming through. It was some cool. It was actually a great house, and there was there was musicians coming through, and we had great parties and stuff, and. That was a beautiful time. Berkeley is a beautiful place. I feel like now all of the tech money is running through Berkeley, so it's kind of all that stuff is getting washed. At least the ease of living is getting washed away. But I was living in South Berkeley, which is kind of a rough neighborhood when I got there in 2010, and by the time I left, it was just completely gentrified.
Oh wow! I guess I should have known, but I didn't know that it had changed. Not having been there since 2006 or something, but Okay, so, and I have to apologize, Jesse. I didn't get a chance to read your book. I did some digging on the reviews, and we've had some listeners who spoke highly of it. So,
cool.
But I would like to read it. But so, what was it like when you finally came out of the tunnel and published the book and did a book tour and all that stuff?
Yeah, it was pretty fun. I guess what was it? What was the dream and what was the reality? I was very pleasantly surprised that the people who read it liked it. A lot of people who wrote nice reviews, and even now sometimes people come up and thank me for the book, which is very meaningful. But at the same time, I don't feel like I got enough people to read it. Mm-hmm. Right? I just didn't get enough people. Like, I didn't get you to read it, right?
Well, I will though. But yeah.
No, but you know what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
I needed
for sure.
A bigger swath of people to have read the book for because at least that would have been my dream when I wrote it. But it's still out there and people talking about it, and I did get inspired to write another book. I don't even know if this next book will even ever come out, but it's still part of the inertia that started when I began that project is still kind of flowing through me, I guess, with this current book.
So what would you say your number one lesson that you learned from the painstaking process of writing one novel? Like, what are you applying to the second one?
Oh, man, I probably didn't learn my lessons. I mean, I say that because writing in terms, it's definitely not a good economic idea. You're not going to get any kind of real economic reward for it.
Well, at least you're not writing about chess this time, so you never know. Your potential audience.
The chess, at least I had an audience. It is, trying to get a book out there is very difficult. And the other thing is, it's not just getting it out there, but like people don't read much these days.
Yeah.
And so if it has success, it has to also be an audiobook, or ideally like get turned into a movie or something.
Right.
Some spike in interest has to happen for the book to even happen at all, because otherwise, your book is just it'll sit there on the Amazon, but it's not going to get bought. Right. It's just going to sit there.
Well, it sounds like your eyes are wide open as you go through this process.
I guess, yeah. I feel pretty frustrated right now, honestly. I learned this new word, rage quit, and I feel like every time I'm just like, I'm going to rage quit. Rage quit.
I mean, that's definitely, I feel like that's part of the process of writing a book. I mean, I haven't taken on that task, thank goodness, but I mean, I don't think you're the first to do that many times in the process of writing something. So how much have you written? Like, how much would you be abandoning if you were to rage quit?
Oh, I've got a full novel, I've got it there. I would have to, I think I need to work on it some, but I finished the draft and everything.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep our eyes open. Let it, be sure to, if and when you go forward with this, we'll put a plug in. The podcast audience isn't huge, but every little bit helps. Get some loyal followers to buy the book and let you know what they think. So as you come out of this, I guess you'll need another big project, huh?
Yeah, I was talking with I have a student, Joshua Gutman. We were playing a tournament together, and I was like, I'm going to go on this podcast, and maybe something will clear up for like what's going to happen to me in life. And he laughed at me. I was like, no, seriously, like maybe someone is going to hear it and like write me an email and say, Kraai, this is what you need to do.
Okay.
I've got a plan for you, buddy. I got something for you to do. Maybe somebody will write in.
Okay, you guys got that? Jesse needs guidance. No, you never know. I mean, the universe is connected in strange ways, so you never know what would happen. Okay, so Jesse, let's get into your chess teaching, because after all, this is a chess podcast. People want to improve, and we've written your 6 or 7 tips, but let's talk about how you work with your students. So you just mentioned one of them. Like, what's your regimen like with Josh?
We just go over the games.
Okay.
I mean, maybe a couple other things, but basically, really in-depth analysis of the games that people play. That's really like whenever I teach, that's basically all I do.
I tend to.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I teach probably, I'm sure, much weaker players than you, but I've sort of come to the conclusion that the value I can provide by going over games is so much greater than the value of any other thing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, what do you try to isolate when you look at someone's games? What are you zeroing in on?
I think when you look at a game, there's so much to talk about. You'd be looking at somebody's games and you can start talking about structures, right? You can start talking about dynamic play. But basically, to put it succinctly, I have a just general philosophy that I find I just keep coming back to again and again in my lessons, which is, that there's 3 dimensions in chess. There is the material aspect that pretty much everybody gets, right? Everybody wants to grab a pawn. Then the second aspect is a little more complicated, and that's time. Like development in the opening and then time to do stuff later in the game. And that's a little bit harder because you have to ask yourself time to do what.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the third dimension is the hardest, and that's like the quality of your pieces, the quality of your king safety and all that other stuff, right? Your pawn structure.
Interesting.
And so I see the way I see chess is like it's a calculus of those 3 dimensions, and you have to be able to judge all of those and kind of do cool stuff where you interrelate one dimension from another. So for example, sometimes people say a pawn is worth 3 tempi. It's usually kind of true. Sometimes it's worth more, sometimes it's worth less. But that's kind of true. So you have to do these beautiful relational switches between those dimensions, I think. And it sounds really deep and it's kind of beautiful, but on the just looking at somebody's games, usually it's more like talking about how they're not respecting development. And honestly, most players under 2200 even, I feel like, are not respecting development. And definitely not the quality of their pieces and piece activity. So I feel like those are the themes, just come back to again and again, or I find myself repeating myself, again and again on those issues.
And in terms of telling someone or with your own playing, do you advocate thinking about them explicitly during a game?
When you say explicitly about...
Like checking off the 3 elements while your clock is ticking, while you're sitting there playing, be like, okay, development-wise, I'm okay. Time...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I really think it's great to just say the simplest things because chess is so complicated and you just say like, oh, I'm 2 tempi ahead here, or my king is crap, all this stuff is just stuff you have to say out loud in some way when you're thinking about the position.
Interesting.
Can I ask you a question, actually?
Sure.
Okay, so I had this big debate with Bruce, and maybe our readers can help us out here. So it didn't get into a fist fight because we were on Skype, but it got pretty heated.
Well, he's a hippie too, right? So I don't.
But no, David might be a hippie in some ways, but he's a fighter.
Okay.
So all right, you do the word tempo, right? Okay, so for me, if you say the starting position, you say white, and I would say white is up a tempo, right?
Okay.
Now, would you say white is up a tempo, or would you say like Bruce, white is up a half tempo?
Oh yeah, this is the timeless debate. Like in sports, when a team is ahead by a game, it's like really it's 2 games because one team won and one team lost. So if you add them together, it's 2 games. But all right. So anyway, is it a tempo or a half tempo? I call it a tempo personally.
Okay, good. Take that, Bruce. Take that.
All right.
Take that, buddy.
This matter is settled now.
Why would I ever want to divide something that's basically, it's a unit. You're either up a tempo or you're not. I'm not going to call it a half tempo. Anyways, I just wanted to clarify that because he was so vehement in the way he was talking to me about it. I was like, am I wrong? I'm going to have to ask somebody about this.
That's funny. Okay, so getting back to the teaching, so you mainly look at their games.
Yeah.
What do you like? Now we're in. Actually, I have a listener question that's related because as we mentioned earlier, you came up in the pre-computer age, as did I, and. Well, I'll just read the question. So this is from Brian Karen. Brian says, Jesse is a strong proponent of analyzing without a computer. I'd be interested in hearing his thoughts on when, if ever, a person should consult a computer at the 1500 level, 2000 level, master level, and GM level.
Okay, that's a good question. So I think that, so, by the way, this process of going over your games is so hard, and one thing I'll say in my experience is like if you start out going over your games and you're like writing out analysis, most people they'll like write 2 pages, which just isn't enough. But honestly, when they first do it, it'll be like, well, that was all the questions I could come up with.
Right.
But then when you get into it, you'll start writing 5 pages, 6, 7, 8, 10. So it turns into a very time intensive thing. But then like what you should do is do all that without the computer. And then you'll do a heartbreaking thing will happen, right? Because what will then happen is you will take your analysis and you will have come up with some kind of strong opinions as to what was going on in the game. And those are very important opinions because that's what you could see with your own mind. When you go into the tournament hall, you can't bring a computer, right?
Oh, you can't?
No, you can't. Apparently you can't.
Oh.
So... what you can do is take your, all your fixed opinions that you've worked out in this long analysis and you think it's hard won and you've got some truth and then put it in the computer and you're going to find some stuff that's going to hurt you. It'll hurt you, you hurt your mind because it'll just blow a lot of your opinions up, like what you thought was going on. And it'll also turn you on to some variations that, maybe you could have seen, right? Like there are cool, interesting tactical ideas that your mind needs to be opened up to, right? And I think that's one of the cool things that the computer's done is it's shown us like a new level of tactics that's, beautiful. And, a lot of the top players coming up now, they're tuned into these ideas and kind of can sometimes, you can't do it all the time, but sometimes play them out in a real game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the moves... Sometimes the hardest part is just considering a move. Once you consider it, you can see it.
Right.
Okay, and in terms of book recommendations, Jesse, do you have any books that you recommend to your students that were particularly formative for you?
It's a good question. I feel like books... Well, I'm going to put it this way. Mick Jagger says that the reason there's no good music nowadays is because there's not enough people making money in music, right? Whereas back in the day, when the 60s and 70s, those bands were actually making a little bit of money. And with chess books, no one's making any real money, so it's hard to like put enough effort into the book to make it like worthy of being read.
Wow.
Right? Like it's very hard to write a book. You got to put a lot of effort into it. I did enjoy... I enjoyed Rowson's 7 Deadly Chess Sins. I thought that was a good book.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like his second book as much, though it had some interesting things in it. And I think a lot of the stuff that's formative to me was like My System and Chess Praxis, but I'm not sure I even want to recommend that because it feels so dated to a lot of new readers that they like put it away in disgust without like thinking about the concepts behind it, because the concepts are really cool, and there's a lot of like metaphor and analogy in there that you can use in your game. And the thing I really take away from it is like what the guy did was he created a fun and cool way to talk about chess concepts, and you really need that when you're playing. You need like words to describe what's going on. And what I did, and I think anybody has to do, is they have to, when they look at their own games or when they play, is they have to have, a set of ways of talking about the game. And that's what I think My System and Chess Praxis will give you an introduction to, just like a way of talking about it.
Okay.
And I think if you're going to read books, that's what you should be looking for. Also, if you get an instructor, like whether it's online or whatever, your goal should really be, not to learn openings or whatever, but have that person look at your games and tell you, like in language, what is going on, so you can understand it.
Like, what do you mean? What is going on? Like, what you need to
what's
work
going
on?
What's going on in the position?
Okay.
Give you a vocabulary, a way to talk about what is going on when you're playing.
Okay. All right, that's good advice. I'm surprised, being that you're basically self-taught and grew up in New Mexico. I'm surprised that it wasn't like a bigger catalog of books that you're just rattling off, because you became a grandmaster somehow. Like, was it really just through the decision journal primarily? Like, was that your most formative thing?
I mean, I'm an ancient guy, so I did everything, right? I played Blitz online. I played in the Bundesliga. I analyzed with those guys in the Bundesliga. That was a big deal. Mm-hmm. I played a lot as a kid. I did a lot of tactics. I love doing puzzles. I've always loved doing puzzles. But I think, studying what took me over the top, really gave me 200 points or whatever I needed to become GM, was definitely working on my own games.
Wow, that's interesting. So do you think, having just played this tournament, do you think you're going to find the time to torture yourself with the games you played?
Good question. So one thing I did when I was, training to become a GM, and I'm really hoping I can reinstitute this in my life, is to say I am not allowed to play in another tournament until I go over the games.
Wow, I'm going to have to steal that rule for sure. But the thing is, like, there's also levels. You're talking about going over it in the method that you advise. You're talking about, like, writing down everything. Because, like, often when I get done a game, getting back to the computer, there's, like, some position where I know there was something there, and I just can't wait to call, to punch it into the computer and see precisely what it is that I missed.
Right.
But that doesn't count, I'm guessing.
Right, and I have students, dude, I'll be like, no, don't do spacebar. You'll get your chance to do the spacebar. I should say, to clarify, at least in the old chess engines, you hit the spacebar and the computer just did the move. His recommended moves would call that spacebar. Yeah, don't do spacebar until you've had a chance to look at it with your own human eyes, because a lot of times what will happen, for example, is you'll turn on the computer and the computer will show you something. And then you'll be like, oh, that was obvious. I should have seen that, right? But if you go back and look at it with human eyes and you can't see it, well, then it's interesting. You'll still get your chance to see it with spacebar. But if you couldn't see it, well, then that shows you that maybe it wasn't as easy as you think it was.
Right.
Computer will oftentimes make things look easy, and it's just when you're over the board, it's just no. And a lot of times when you're over the board, that's why you have to, realize that you're going to have to develop your intuition. It's not going to be necessarily you're going to be able to figure everything out. A lot of moves you're going to have to play, and you're just like, I think this is the right thing to do.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just a couple more topics if you don't mind, Jesse.
Sure.
So you mentioned getting in time trouble this weekend, and you, like me, grew up in the sort of slow time control age, and now things are speeding up. So do you ever play action chess? And if so, how does it work out?
I haven't done a lot of action. It's just getting faster and faster, though, right? I mean, I do enjoy blitz chess, and I played in like the U.S. Chess League, and that was fast. So that was kind of U.S. Chess League was kind of like an action game.
Yeah.
So I would do that again, I guess. I wasn't very good at it or anything. I mean, I don't mind it. I find like those games don't give you enough to study later on, though. That's part of my problem with it. They're superficial, and I kind of have this argument like with Greg Shahada and a lot of these other people who are proponents of making the game faster and faster. Is to their mind, what they think they're doing is making the game more accessible to viewers, and that might totally be true. I think there's a lot of legitimacy to that claim, and when you look at like chess.com and the Pro Chess League and like amount of people watching that, as far as what people have told me, like that is successful. Like people are watching, but what it does is it takes, when you play quicker, it takes the spirituality of the game out of it. And what I just mean by that is like the ability to sit inside a position and be blown away by how beautiful and complex the position is, and then to come to some kind of reasoned judgment about what you think is going on. And, then you have a real battle of ideas with your opponent in that way. And so you make it faster, and maybe it's funner to watch, but you take away, I think, what's beautiful about the game.
Yeah, I get that. But I mean, okay, so there's the argument about it being more entertaining and more accessible, which I agree with Greg. But there's also the argument that, like, we're parents. You and I have kids. Like, so I'm much worse at action chess, but it's way more realistic for me to play it than for me to, for me to sit in the woods and appreciate the beauty of like a 6-hour game.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, hopefully there's room for both.
Well, I think increasingly what you see is kind of an interesting thing has happened where the FIDE time control is mostly taken over. It's kind of become a standardized thing that almost every tournament is at least doing that or something very close to it now, which maybe is a good thing. I mean, back in the day, we'd have time controls varying all over the place in terms of how they work.
Yeah, I think uniform is good. Whatever we settle on, I think the less variation, the better amongst like whatever we define as blitz, rapid, and classical.
Right.
Okay, yeah, and you mentioned the Pro Chess League, Jesse. I mean, having grown up in the U.S. and followed chess, obviously I knew your name anyway, but I really enjoyed your announcing. I mean,
cool. Yeah, thanks.
You've got a good relaxed style that I think makes it enjoyable for the viewer. So do you know yet if you'll be doing that again this year? Or I guess it's next year?
Probably. I've been doing a couple other things with chess.com too, with like going over tournaments and stuff. And we did some recaps from the World Cup. I did that with Yermo. I really enjoyed doing it with like people with like Yermo, and I did the Pro Chess League with like Irina, and those were like quick. You had to say something funny fast, or the position moved on. But with Yermo, we did some game analysis, and actually, he's an example of someone I feel who has Russian chess culture, who has like a vocabulary and way of talking about the game that's really interesting to me. And so I'll go on that show, and I just feel a lot of times I'm like a student. I'm just like, because we'll have the games already that we're going to cover, and I'll just be like, Yermo, man, what do you think about this position? I'll already picked out the position. I'll be like, Yermo, man, tell me about this position.
Nice. Yeah, that guy's a legend. He was an entertaining podcast guest too, not surprisingly.
Yeah, I heard about that. I'm going to try to listen to that one.
Yeah, it was a good one. Okay, so last but not least, Jesse, we went through your biography, but we never got to how you ended up in Baltimore. We heard the sirens in the background earlier, so staying true to the representation of Baltimore and pop culture. How's life there, and how'd you get there?
So let's see. I got married in 2015. And we had a kid in 2016, and then my wife got into an MFA program in creative writing here at Hopkins.
Oh, nice.
So we live pretty close to Hopkins, and we live in like this bubble of people who are like mostly academic types around Hopkins, and then The Wire is just a couple blocks from here. It's really intense, and like I'm from the West Coast, and we have racial stuff going on there, but it's nothing like here. It's like you cross the street and you're just in another land, you know? And we hear sirens, and then there's some, the homicide rate is just intense here. It's like the one person a day is dying, So it's a whole new world. I don't think we're going to stay here probably, but there are cool parts about it here too. It's easy, it's cheap. There's some cool people here. It's you can go to DC or Philly or wherever really easy. So it's not all bad at all.
Yeah, no, and the downtown's cute. Like I really like the architecture. Obviously, the Inner Harbor's nice. But yeah, it's life in 3D.
Right.
Okay, well, Well, Jesse, I don't think. Okay. I mean, one related question. It occurred to me that since you live in Baltimore and you're from New Mexico, you're the perfect person to settle the Breaking Bad versus Wire debate once and for all. Have you watched both shows?
I have watched both shows, but no one's ever asked me as a debate. I will say that when The Wire came out, I thought that show was the greatest show ever, like by far. Especially seasons 1 and 3. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's interesting. At the time, I didn't know anything about Baltimore. I really didn't. And I was like, is this part of America that you're describing in this show? Is this for real? And having come here, and people have said it too, they're like, that show is not even as rough as the city actually is, you know? Wow. And it's honestly, the crime, as far as I can tell, it's gotten worse since that show was made. That's another thing about that show. I was like, when I saw that, I was like, well, obviously this show is going to force them to fix the problem there.
Right.
Obviously, right? But no, that's not what happened. But anyways, when I'm too long of an answer. My wife and I rewatched The Wire when we got here to like get into the groove of Baltimore. And it didn't hold up as well. And I think that's part of just like shows have evolved since The Wire. You know, like the storytelling involved in shows has evolved significantly to where The Wire feels dated now. So I think The Wire, in terms of a success in its own time, is better than Breaking Bad. But in terms of like storytelling and the cinematography and everything, Breaking Bad is better in that sense. And both shows, I think, captured very well both Baltimore and then Albuquerque.
Yeah, and
they really did capture it.
Yeah, and I'm from Philly originally, so I've been to Baltimore many times, but New Mexico only once, and it always had a sort of mystique. And Breaking Bad only grew the mystique in my mind.
Right. Yeah, and I grew up in Santa Fe, which is about 60 miles from Albuquerque, and really a different place, both economically and culturally, even geographically. It's up in the mountains, and Albuquerque's still at 5,000 feet or something, but and Albuquerque has changed in my lifetime. It was always a little grittier, but what's going on there in Breaking Bad, and also now, it is evolving into it's evolving into a dangerous city.
Oh no. Yeah, the opioid epidemic plus meth seemed like a bad combination for that place.
Well, I think it's also like the show is describing. It's a point where the drug trade is passing through.
Right. Yeah. Okay, and all right, very, very last question. So now that we're on the topic of TV, do you have anything that you're into currently?
I've watched a couple good things. I really like the O.J. Simpson one.
Oh, yeah, that was really good, the documentary.
Yeah, that was really great.
Or do you mean the fiction one or the...
No, the one that was based off of Tubin's book.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I watch a lot of bad TV. I think the last thing I watched, though, that I really, really was into was Stranger Things.
Okay.
I thought that was amazing. And then I don't know, I'm going to wait to see if the hype is on to the next episode, next season. I don't even know if I'm going to watch it, because a lot of times the second season is just no good.
Okay, I haven't seen it, so I can't comment, but I have heard good things. So, all right, so we got book recommendations, TV recommendations, maybe where to live recommendations, where not to live recommendations. So I think we're all set, Jesse. If people would like to reach out to you, how should they do so?
I have a pretty defunct website, but if they go there, all my contact information is there.
Yeah, I did track you down through there. So
yeah.
And thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, and this was fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed being here. It's good talking to you.
Good news, everyone. We're only a few donations away from covering the cost of the podcast. Special thanks go out to my Patreon Perpetual partners. They are Chris Wainscott, Coach J's Chess Academy, Chris Flanagan, Gary Andrews, I am Greg Shahade, Jennifer Valens, WGM Jen Shahade, Jens Green, Kelly Palmer, Krishna Galapakrishnan, Matthew Tedesco, GM Pascal Charbonneau, Paul Swaney, Ricky Grahava, Rob Lazorchak, Tim Seymour, Todd Bryant, and FM Zhao Chang. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back next week.